this section is called the integration love story. So what we mean about that is, when did you do you have any specific case where you actually like fell in love with integration? Do you have any specific business case or any technique that you felt like, wow, integration?
So this one, I think there's many, and to be honest, this one wasn't mine per se, but it was like the team I was on. I didn't implement this, but someone on the team implemented this. So it was actually turning someone's power on and off,
Mm,
um, using integration. And so this was at a utility, and it was one of those things where this utility had, covered a lot of rural properties,
mm,
and some of these properties had, like, were sort of seasonal, like sort of like at the lake, the
mm,
cabins, those types of things. And it was one of those things where people could request a disconnect
mm,
because, like, it was the end of the season, it was going to get cold. And so what this would mean is that, you would oftentimes have to send a power line technician, you know 30, 40 kilometers,
mm,
20ish miles, to go turn the power off, which for them was like kind of like a 2-minute job.
mm,
But they would end up spending probably an hour to get there and back to go
mm.
do this. And they were also just like wasting gas. Well, I guess using gas.
Yeah, yeah.
and and it was one of those things where, we had introduced this notion of automated meter
Mm,
infrastructure, AMI. And this is like, 18 years ago or 16
mm,
years ago, so this is like a long time ago,
mm,
but it still resonates with me. And it was this ability from SAP that when someone requested their power to be turned off, and if they had the right type of meter,
mm,
they literally could hit a button in SAP, and basically BizTalk was subscribing or listening to that particular event, and would then sort of orchestrate these calls against the automated metering system,
yeah,
and basically would send the request down the power lines.
yeah.
So power line carrier, like, and I'm sure the technology's changed. They've got RF and all this crazy stuff now, but those requests would actually make it down the power line to the meter, and then the meter would basically get turned off. And so it was like highly impactful for many reasons. I think there was environmental benefits because we weren't rolling a truck. It was a productivity benefit because that allowed a power line technician to go to a job that required them to be there.
Mm,
And I think it also reduced its safety, the risk of safety incidents, right? Like anytime you go to a property, there's some inherent risks. I
mm,
think anytime you're on the highway, especially if it's like on the shoulder seasons, questionable weather,
yeah,
that imposes some questionable risks as well.
mm,
And so that one still just really sticks out to me as being like hugely transformational,
yeah,
from that perspective.
mm,
And that was something that's sort of still near and dear to my heart, even though I didn't implement it. A colleague had implemented it,
mm,
and that's something that I still look back on as being like, wow, that's amazing,
yeah,
to be able to go ahead and do it. And that's another example of, like, you know SAP was built without that sort of in mind.
yeah, yeah,
This AMI system, like, obviously was built with this in mind, but they didn't know, like, the other end of the pipe, who
yeah,
was going to be able to do that. And the ability to go do that, and there was huge business value there. And
yeah,
so it wasn't just about doing integration for the sake of integration, but it was hardcore business value. So if you did, what was the ROI of that interface?
mm,
It paid for itself probably thousands of times
yeah,
over,
yeah,
as a result. And so I just, I've always worked for these companies where we've had, like, strong business leadership that bought into this notion
mm,
of of integration, and it was, I think, for these types of reasons
mm,
that you could do it. And sometimes integration is a bad word because it's perceived as being complex and
mm,
expensive, and sometimes it can be. I think the whole our goal with, like, Logic Apps and Azure Integration Services is to reduce the complexity and the cost.
mm,
But when you can really find those sweet spots that are transformational,
mm,
it's pretty impactful. And at that point, you start to get a little bit more recognition
Yeah.
from from like everyone in the company when you can start to go after some of those particular use cases.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Wow, that's
Yeah, it's actually a really good story because nowadays you don't really get that impressed that easy
no.
with things. Like back then, I can imagine
How
that would.
impressive was that to
Yes,
see
of course.
power went out?
We take these things for granted.
Yeah.
This is that's a really nice
Uh,
story.
And the so we actually the my colleague Luciano, he was the guy that built this. Like there was a BizTalk summit, I think, in Redmond,
Mm.
probably like 2013 ish, somewhere around there. And so he actually went there and presented and brought a light bulb onto stage, and they did some finagling to get this registered, and he actually demoed this live in Redmond on
Wow.
stage.
Wow.
And he was in SAP and like hit the button, and I don't know, I can't remember how that all got plumbed and working, but he actually did this online in front of everyone, and so it was it was truly you know great to see the demo, but
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah,
we would see it live, from that perspective, back at the actual office.